Hello, listener. In today's Eurofootball Verdicts podcast, we're doing a special episode on preview of the Portuguese First Division. What's going to happen in the country of the European champions? Who's going to win the title? Who's going to get Europe? And who's going to get sad when it all ends and relegated? All the biggest surprises, everything about the Portuguese league in today's special episode with Portuguese football expert Miguel Moreira. Stay tuned for this and more in today's special episode.
Hello listeners, welcome to our Liga NOS special. We're going to look through a couple of our favorite leagues, and this one is dedicated to the Portuguese First Division. Today, we don't have Marco, and neither do we have Steph. We have special guest, Portuguese football expert, and my dear friend, Miguel Moreira. Miguel, welcome.
Thank you, Alex. It's a pleasure to be here. Not so sure regarding the expert part, though, but I'll do my best to give my inputs about what looks to be a very promising season for the Portuguese league, as there has been a lot of interesting signings, a lot of changes in the team squads, and also in the managers. So let's talk about what's coming and what we can expect this year.
Here's Miguel, so let's kick it off. So let's start first to discuss what happened a bit last year. So last year we had a title win for your dear FC Porto. They clinched the title from Benfica after a very good recovery. So Miguel, how does it look for your team in this year? Give me a brief overview of expectation around Porto.
So I think to answer that question, we really need to also focus on Porto's rivals, and especially Benfica, which I believe will be the main contender. And in my opinion, was also the strongest candidate to win last year as well. And as you mentioned, they were ahead in the first spot of the league during a long time. But I think that the break caused by the pandemic was actually very beneficial for Porto, who came back on the pitch with a renewed confidence and strength. And I think that was what really made it to go to Porto's way, because the last 10 rounds, Porto dominated. And although they had a slight misstep when they lost the first game after the comeback against Famalicão, after that, the team really got together. They corrected the mistakes they were making. And sometimes playing very flashy football, sometimes with really tough matches where the quality wasn't exactly the best. But they managed to get a lot more points than Benfica, which actually had a really poor performance after the comeback of the division. So they actually made it to the first spot, and they never left it once they got there. And they ended up being crowned champions, although having, in my opinion, a worse squad. Not so much in terms of quality of the starting 11, but especially if you look at the depth of the squad, they were clearly inferior to Benfica, which had more options with the same level of quality. So it was actually a very positive season, also ending with the trophy, the Portuguese Cup, precisely against Benfica in a match that was, again, as the whole season, very rough. We had a player sent off, and despite all those struggles, we still managed to win. So it was the perfect ending for a season which was really, really tough for the club, as while we were behind in the league, there was a lot of fans already asking for the coach's head, that this project was going nowhere. So I think the break actually was beneficial, because it managed for the team to regroup, to really think what was being done that wasn't working. And the fans also had some time to calm down, I'd say. And after that, they all got together. The fans also got behind the team, because they understood that it's actually more beneficial for them to support the team than rather being critical all the time. So I think that was a really interesting turnaround to see. I wasn't expecting that at all. If you had told me that in January, Porto would be champion by the league's end, I wouldn't have believed you. But I'm glad it ended up all right for Porto.
Bruno Lage being replaced with an interim manager, now with Jorge Jesus for the upcoming season. And so it's looking very, very interesting season. I think also from Sporting with a couple of players also looking interesting. Yeah, it was definitely a very interesting end of season. We also have the manager's shift at Benfica but I think we have a really interesting league ahead. Maybe one team way in front of the others, but I'd still like to run through you the top five. What do you think? Who's going to be fifth?
Well, that's actually a very difficult question to answer for this season. As you mentioned, there have been a lot of changes, not only in terms of players coming in and coming out, but also managers changing seats. And I'm inclined to say that Rio Ave will get the fifth spot and therefore access to the Europa League because they have a very interesting manager, although he doesn't have a lot of experience managing senior teams. He was the manager of the Porto youth team that clinched the youth league. He had a very hard-working career. He just climbed step by step. So he got where he is with a lot of merit. And he's getting a squad that was managed by Carvalhal, which is now in charge of Braga. And the squad hasn't changed that much. They lost a couple of important players, but they also recovered players that were on loan and performed well in other clubs. And they also signed a couple of interesting new players. So let's see. I think they'll be my choice for the fifth place. Then regarding the fourth place, I think this is a very tough analysis to make without considering the Champions League, the third spot, because I think that this will be a very, very tight competition between Braga and Sporting this year. As you mentioned, Sporting had some very nice signings, but also did Braga. Sporting has the advantage of keeping the same manager from last year. With Braga ended up the season also with an interim coach. Things didn't go so well at the end, but they eventually got the third spot last year. And this year they'll start with a new coach, but it isn't exactly an unknown coach. It's a guy that already proved to be a very seasoned guy in this type of matches and in the Portuguese league. And he's inheriting also a very, very good squad. I just mentioned that they finished third last year, so I think it's reasonable to say that they're hoping they can at least get the same spot this year. So I think it will be very tight between Sporting and Braga to see who will get the third place and therefore access to the Champions League, and who will be relegated, so to speak, to the Europa League, which will also have a great impact on the team's finances for the upcoming year.
So if you have to choose between Braga and Sporting,
I'm sorry, Alex. I really am going for Braga. I think they had very interesting signings, and I think we'll talk more about it in the upcoming minutes. And I think that they kept the same base of the team, which was already quite good. And a little bit like the comparison between Porto and Benfica, in terms of starting 11, I'm not sure which one is best. But if you look at the depth of the squads, I think Braga has a lot more options. So for especially this year, because the season is starting a bit almost in the end of September, so we'll have less time to play a lot of matches, so it will be a really tough season physically, and having a deep squad where you can get solutions for every position of the same quality will really make a difference. And I think that's where Braga gets the upper hand on Sporting. So I'm picking them for third spot and Sporting on the fourth.
Very interesting and ballsy. Let's see if you're correct about that. I mean, obviously, I'm gonna back up my boys, and I'll say they will finish third, and I think Braga will finish fourth. We have to be honest, and this for all listeners, there is a clear gap between the top four, so to say, and the fifth in Portugal. I mean, there is not even a discussion that this top four is going to be the top four, because the gulf in class, the difference between fourth and fifth is just humongous. We can argue the whole night long who's going to finish fifth. There's enough teams to go around for exactly that place, but the top four is, it's defined. There is no shocking surprises entering there.
Yeah, exactly. I think the only challenge here is how to organize those four teams. And I think you can try to organize them in two different blocks, so first and second and third and fourth. But really, if there are any surprises this year, so it wouldn't be that shocking to see Braga or Sporting getting second spots. But let's see. But as you mentioned, I also think it's important, since we're doing like this analysis of the Liga NOS, to actually give a lot of credit to Braga, because we both know, as we follow the league since we remember we exist, that Braga was never considered to be one of the big four. In Portugal, we only had big three teams. So the last couple of years, Braga did an amazing job, and they got to where they are now with a lot of effort. and the team has clearly established themselves as the fourth big team in Portugal. They're getting some titles, which was what they were missing, the trophies, because the league spots that they were getting always like fourth place, fifth place, third place. So they now added some trophies to their cabinet, and they're for sure the fourth biggest club in the country.
Yeah, I think probably half of Belenenses fans and probably all of Boavista fans would disagree. But yeah, I think you're onto something.
The thing is, Belenenses fans are following their team on the regional championship, so because they don't really support this team that stayed in the first league. So I will disagree with you on that.
Fair enough. So yeah, regarding fourth place in this case, I'm disagreeing with you. I think it's going to be for Braga, because I expect Sporting to at least achieve third, because we desperately need it for Champions League purposes. I think though place number 5, I think can be 4 to 5 teams, and I'm going to say that here it's where my biggest surprise is going to fall. I think place number 5, it's going to go for Marítimo. Marítimo is a very surprise, not because they have a huge quality in players coming in, but I think their manager, Lito Vidigal, I think he's one of those managers who's very defensively savvy, who knows how to grind results, who's really annoying to play with. You know, he's the kind of manager that goes to Dragão or Luz or Alvalade and gets a 1-1 draw. When you see Famalicão and Guimarães, who would definitely be for me the biggest contenders for place number 5, they're in a rebuilding stage. Famalicão had an amazing team last year, but basically more than half of the team is now gone. And I think they're going to take a while to, even if they get the amazing players, they're going to take a while to regroup. I think Guimarães has the new manager, Thiago, former Atletico Madrid player, but you never know what is in there. Again, it's a bit the same with the manager of Rio Ave. I think we still don't know what is in there, whilst you have a manager like Lito Vidigal, who's really experienced, and I think they'll make it to 5th place.
Okay, that's a ballsy statement. I totally agree with you that Lito is probably one of the best coaches in the league, but I have to disagree with you because I really see him, and I might be wrong, maybe he'll prove me wrong this year, but I really see him as a coach that is really good at getting teams to stay on the league. So teams that have, I don't want to say squads with less quality or that are not performing so well, and he just comes in and he's able to get a grip on those players and just to get the results. As you said, like he's able to create results out of nowhere in matches where the team isn't actually playing well, but because he's very savvy and he's been here, he's been around in the league for so many years, he can get the points. I'm not so sure if you can build a successful team that actually plays nice football, because let's be honest, to be 5th, you do need to know how to play football and not just to get those results at the last instant. So I don't think they'll get to the 5th place, but as you mentioned, the 5th place, I think, especially this year, is a really big challenge to predict because a lot of interesting teams are coming up. Just today, we had the confirmation that Quaresma is joining Guimarães. So we're talking about a player that played over 80 times for Portugal, scoring more than 10 goals. So he's going to add a lot of experience to a squad that has players like Noah Holm or Lyle Foster coming in from teams like Leipzig and Monaco. So they have a really interesting team, but they're all new. So they're rebuilding the whole squad. Same goes for Famalicão. They have a lot of interesting players coming in, but more than half the squad left. So to me, it's a really big challenge to predict whether they'll be good or not this season. I think it's very difficult to predict. And same goes for Boavista, which is actually where I have to signal a player that I really think can make a difference in the Portuguese league, which is Angel Gomes, and especially considering that there's no cost associated to the transfer. Of course, it's a loan, so it's not a permanent deal, but still, I think that for a team of Boavista's size, since they got back to the first league after they had been relegated to the lower league. So, and it's an important signing for a club that so far was just trying to survive in the first division. And this year, for the first time, their fans actually can believe they can achieve something like European football. They have Adil Rami, like a a defender that 2 years ago was winning a World Cup with France. So they have a lot of interesting signings. To me, those are the two most interesting, Angel Gomez and Adil Rami. So they have a very promising squad, but I'm not so sure about their manager, who doesn't have a lot of experience in the first league. And the team as a whole, the whole squad is new. So will he be able to actually build a team around good players or not? So we'll see how it goes. I think the fifth spot is really difficult to predict this year.
Very interesting take on what can happen in the fifth spot, but let's give our listeners what they are all waiting for. Talk to me about who's clinching the title this year. Is it everyone's expected team? Is it the $1 million club? The guys who go all out and buy everyone?
I don't know if you can hear the tears falling very slowly from my face while I'm answering, but I'll have to say Benfica will clinch the title this year. As I mentioned before, doing a recap of last season, to me, in my personal opinion, they already had the best squad last year. So at least in terms of depth, they had a lot of more options. And this year, they got a coach that was already champion when he was managing them a couple of years ago, and just won everything in Brazil. He also won the Libertadores Cup, so he comes with a lot of confidence and morale. And they did a super investment in the squad, which to me was already the strongest. So I think there's a huge gap in terms of quality from one squad to another. And whilst I do recognize some value to Porto's coach Sergio Conceição, I think Jorge Jesus he has proven over the last few years that he is one of the best managers in Portugal. So if you combine one of the best managers with a top squad, I think it's, I don't like to say mandatory, but I really think the pressure is on them to win this year because they have all the conditions to do so quite easily, I must say.
Now, it's a very interesting team. They already spent 18 million euros. So you have players like Darwin Núñez from Almeria, second division in Spain, costing 24 million euros. Everton Cebolinha, 20, Pedrinho, 18, Lucas Waldschmidt, 15, Jan Vertonghen came free of cost for Benfica, but we're talking 80 million. Now, Jorge Jesus is saying Benfica has world-class infrastructure, world-class stadium, world-class fans. It's just missing world-class players. So 80 million spent. You think they still need more to win Liga NOS, or is this about gaining control of European football?
I think that's really the issue for this year because he was already champion when he was managing Benfica, but he never got the chance to get his hands on an European trophy. He was very close to do so when he lost the two Europa League finals, first to Chelsea and then to Sevilla. And I really believe that he only came back to the club because the president promised him that he would have the conditions he would need to build a strong and successful team, not only in Portugal, but in Europe. Because I think, as I mentioned, I think that the gap in quality between the two squads of the main title contenders, the gap is huge. So I'm already assuming that they will be able to clinch the title. And I think the real goal for this year will actually be to go far in the Champions League if they manage to get there. Let's not forget they still have to overcome the third round and plus a playoff, which in my opinion, if they don't, that will cause a big problem in terms of finance to the club and also in terms of the fans' expectations, because with all these new players coming in, I think even the fans are expecting the Jesus to lead the team to at least, I don't know, round of 16 or quarterfinals. I mean, everything can happen in the Champions League draw. If they get paired with Inter and Manchester City, it will obviously be very tough. But I think that's the expectation, and that's where they have set the bar, as you mentioned, by spending 80 million in new players to what was already a strong enough squad to win the title in Portugal. So I think the objectives for this season have to have some kind of success in Europe besides just, I don't like to say just winning the league, but it really is what it is right now. I think it's not enough for them to win the league this year.
Definitely, I agree with you. I think Benfica is way too strong. Currently, as we see the clubs, and we've seen that Porto is still not entering the market as strong as we were expecting, which is normal. But currently, you see Benfica way ahead in terms of squad, not only of starting 11. We're talking also depth, because these players, some of these that I mentioned, like Pedrinho and Cebolinha, at least one of them is going to be on the bench, and Lucas Waldschmidt, which is, it's basically a 15 or 20 million euro player on the bench, which is everyone's dream. Porto and Sporting would kill to have a 15 or a 20 million player on the bench to be able to make the difference. So I think I agree with you. I think Benfica has to be. I think it's a bit what Porto did a couple of years ago with Lopetegui in terms of go big or go home. I mean, it's either bang or bust in this case. If they don't manage to win, it's going to be really tough for them.
Yeah, I think it's important to mention that we haven't done so far. But for our listeners that are not so familiar with the situation in Portugal, and particularly in Benfica, it's important for you to know that this year Benfica will have elections. And this is, at least that I can remember, the year where the current president is under more pressure from the fans, especially because he has promised every time he got re-elected to get European success, and then he never managed to get the club to get it. They were close, as I mentioned, on the 2 Europa League finals, but they never really got it. And in some years, they lost, like last year, they lost the league when they were a couple of points ahead, and the fans were really, really annoyed with that. So I think it's exactly as you mentioned. It's a move very similar to what Porto did a couple of years ago when they hired Lopetegui, and they gave him a white card to hire players, and he also spent around 70 million in players to look good, not only in Portugal, but also in Europe. Actually, that year, Porto made it to the quarterfinals, and they actually won against Bayern at home. Of course, they were thrashed in Bayern, in Munich afterwards. But still, that team really caused an impact in Europe, but they weren't able to get the championship in Portugal. So it was a massive failure. And I think this is what can happen this year. Obviously, we're just talking about predictions and in theory, and football has nothing to do in theory. It really depends on what's going to happen on the pitch. So. But at least in theory, Benfica has all the conditions to win the league and go far in Europe, obviously depending on what kind of group they have in the draw. In comparison, if we look at Porto, as you asked me also before, I think they will get second spot. And I think that you said what I think every Porto fan thinks, although we don't like to admit it. It's like everyone in Porto would like to have Everton Cebolinha in the team right now. For example, a signing of his size. And I think the best signing we had so far is a guy that was already in the squad, but barely played last year, which is Shoya Nakajima, the Japanese player who did a very, very promising season in Portimonense 2 years ago. But then he was transferred to Qatar, and then he got back last year to play in Porto, but mostly due to off-the-pitch situations. He really didn't get a chance to get a place on the starting 11 and actually show what he can do. At least what he promised he could do when he was playing for Portimonense. And I think he will be, at least so far, the biggest recovery for the squad comparing to last year. I think what Porto is hoping for is to keep the same base that played last year, because I believe that that's the way they can try to fight Benfica. If they maintain the same group of players that were crucial to clinch the title and the cup last year. So I think Benfica, in theory, has everything that is needed to win. But if Porto can keep the same team that actually was able to get the title from them last year, I think they might have a chance at doing so this year. So it's not lost already. I mean, we're always trying to predict what's going to happen, but let's wait and see.
No, definitely you're on the right on that one with players such as Alex Telles and Corona and Danilo, which are part of the engine room of that team on the verge of being able to leave the club. I think Alex Telles is clearly, if someone leaves, the first one to leave would be him, because he's honestly an extraordinary player, way above the level of this league. It's the kind of player that would deserve to be playing quarter and semifinals of a Champions League every year. I think he's extraordinary. From left back, the amount of assists he does, his crossing ability is off the charts. I think Porto's team is quite interesting. What's going to happen regarding the strikers? I had, though, a very interesting question for you. There's a player I'm really interested in Porto's team. young center back, Diogo Leite, who is someone I really like, but you have in the team currently Pep, who is 36 going on 37.
37 already.
37 already. And you have also Marcano still in the team. You have Mbemba, who was the hero of the Portuguese Cup. Is there any room for him? He was set to be on his way to Valencia, but as we all know in previous podcasts, Valencia is now basically bankrupt. Do you think there's a place for him to break through that defense, or?
Actually, that's a very interesting question. I'm also a big fan of his abilities, and I actually saw him play for the under-21 team 3 years ago, and he actually scored 2 very, very beautiful goals against Cyprus. And I think he's a player that still lacks some ability to play for Porto in terms of the first team regularly. But that's the thing with all young players. If you don't play, you don't evolve. And I think that the last 2 seasons, I think 2 seasons ago, he played 6 or 7 official matches with Porto's first team. Then last season he played 18, but most of them just coming off the bench. So he didn't really get an opportunity to get the spot on the starting 11. And I think this year, since Ivan Marcano, which is the starting central defender on the left side of Porto's defense, is injured at least until November, you would think that since he's also a player that likes the left side of the defense, he would get his chance. But the truth is that last year he also got that opportunity, and eventually was Mbemba that got the spot. And he did a couple of very nice performances from the moment that he grabbed the place on the starting 11 until the end of the league. And as you mentioned, he was the hero of the cup, which was the last official game of the season. So I don't see Diogo starting on the starting 11 in the beginning of the season, because I think Mbemba will keep his high-earned spot alongside Pepe, the guy that just turned 37 but still runs like a youngster. And I think he might have some chances during the season, but when Marcano is back, I really don't know what's in it for him, you know? And I think that a player his age, if I'm not mistaken, he's 21 or 22, I think he needs to play. And you mentioned very well that he was about to be sold to Valencia, where he could actually fit and have more playing time in a top team. But things just turned sour. Valencia doesn't have the ability to invest right now, and I don't think they will make an offer of the dimension that Porto needs to sell him, because he's a youngster with a lot of potential talent. So I don't think he will be sold at a cut price. But staying in the squad will be, I think, an incognito as well. So we really don't know what he can expect by staying in the squad. We also have Diogo Queiroz, which is another center back that just got back from a loan in Belgium, where he played regularly, he evolved, and he will also be competition. So right now we have 5 center backs, and the most likely is that one of them will go, will have to be transferred. We just don't really know which one. But let's wait and see. I personally, on a personal level, I would really like to see Diogo having more chances, because I believe that, especially considering that Pep is 37 and Marcano 33, if I'm not mistaken, he is the future of the club, alongside Diogo Queiroz, who plays on the right side of the defense and is 21. They are both the future. But then you have Mbemba, which is also performing very well, and it would be highly unfair to take him off the team. But let's see. I think Porto's transfer market is still just beginning. As I mentioned, Alex Telles is very, very likely to go out. Today there were rumors in Portugal that he was about to sign with Man United, but those are just press rumors. You know how it is, the silly season. Let's see if it gets confirmed or not. I really think he deserves to move to a club that, as you mentioned, plays the quarterfinals of the Champions League, or should be playing quarterfinal of the Champions League more often than Porto does. But let's see. I think the whole market of Porto will develop a bit later than other clubs, because as we are still under the wing of financial fair play, we didn't have the ability to invest. And I think that the board also didn't want to sell some of its assets before they knew that they could buy replacements. And now we just sold Fabio Silva, a striker, very promising striker, for 40 million. And maybe that will give some room of maneuver for the board to negotiate other players, knowing that they will be able to get a replacement afterwards. So let's wait and see.
No, there's definitely a very easy solution for the whole Diogo Leite saga. He's a center back, promising young center back who needs playing time. I think the only sensible thing is to send him to a team that actually needs a center back right now quite urgently, and that would be Sporting. I think that's the only reason the deal should go through. You just basically send him over, and we'll send you, a youngster somehow, or maybe, Luis Felipe or something that could help you up front.
Well, we'll take Nuno Mendes if you want to swap them.
Yeah, let's not be crazy.
He would be the perfect replacement for Telles. So if you're proposing a player swap, I'd go for Mendes. Mendes for later.
Jorge Mendes, yeah, okay, you can have him. No, but let's bring our attention back to the capital. So basically, Sporting, which you predicted to finish fourth, I would disagree. Very interesting couple of signings, and then very weird signings so far for Sporting. You have players like Pote from Famalicão for 6.5 million for half of his economic rights, which is promising young player who might even fit either as a starting position in the midfield if Wendell chooses to leave, or might play alongside him. Maybe, I think that's unlikely. Then you have also Porro on loan from Manchester City, who's showing a bit of ability. You have a couple of guys who we already know what they're going to deliver, like Nuno Santos. He's a squad player who might be able to do a couple of minutes here and there. And a lot of unknowns like Fedal, for instance, and still one or two places to fill. Should Sporting fans be hopeful with Ruben Amorim at charge and all of the youngsters? Currently, they have, I think, behind Guimarães, the second youngest squad in the league currently. Do you think there should be hope?
You touched some interesting points there. I think that Sporting did some great signings, and I would signal here Antonio Adan, the goalkeeper. I think he will be a nice upgrade in terms of quality on the goal, because I don't think Maximiano is a bad player. I just think he's still a bit inexperienced, and I think he didn't evolve as much as I was expecting him to do so last season. So I think they did very well in getting a replacement which can guarantee immediate quality, because it's a very sensible position that can define whether you win or lose a match. So I think that was the biggest signing so far. But then I also think they will have a huge problem by losing Jeremy Mathieu. I mean, to me, Jeremy Mathieu was the best center back in the league last season, and unfortunately, due to injury, he was forced to finish his career earlier than expected. And as you mentioned, the signing that was brought in to replace him is Fedal, that just came from Real Betis. And I'm not so sure whether he will be able to fill the giant shoes left by Mathieu. And I think that could be a big problem, because Sporting last year was a bit inconsistent in the defense, and Mathieu, Coates were still the two players that would assure some quality and some security in defense. And I think this year that might be a problem. Other than that, I think that you got interesting players, for example, like you mentioned Pedro Porro, which is a problem that affected Sporting from since a couple of years at the right backs. They didn't have a player that could be distinct in terms of quality from others. I think there was always a lot of discussion amongst Sporting fans who should play that position, and a lot of diverging opinions, whether it should be Ristovski or Rosier. So I think Pedro Porro...
Or neither of them. Just leave it
you
empty.
You need someone to play there, I think. But I think Porro, if he can confirm the potential that he's expected, and at least from the pre-match, the preseason matches that I saw, he does look like he's going to confirm that potential. So I think he can grab that place on the starting 11. And he's on a loan, but it's a 2-year loan, so it's not exactly a player that can do a good season and just go away. He's a project of a player that is expected to stay for 2 years at Sporting, and I think that would be a really interesting signing if he confirms to be up to his potential, and that would solve a long time problem that Sporting has. Then you also have Pote, which, as you mentioned, can play as a central midfield or even play a bit closer to the attacking players. I'm very curious to see what he's going to add to the squad. He's also a player that is on Portugal's under-21 squad, and he's a very promising player. And he already has experience from the first league. As last season, he was playing for Famalicão, which was, I would say, the most surprising team. I think everyone would agree with me on this one. It was the most surprising team that we ever saw, because they just got up from the second division, and then they were very, very close to fighting for an Europa League place, because they had an incredible team. And Pote was a centerpiece of that team. So I think he was a very nice signing. He wasn't exactly cheap for transfer between Portuguese clubs, but I think that he's only 21. So I think that if he can evolve and become also a center player in Sporting, he can be sold in a couple of years from now for from a lot more. So let's see what he can do and what he can add. In terms of players going out, I think so far, at least, I don't think that you lost a lot. Just the departure of Mathieu was the one that has the most impact. But I think that the market is still open for Sporting. I think one very good piece of news was that João Palhinha, which was very close to join CSKA Moscow, back down on the deal, and he was reintegrated with the squad, and he did a very, very nice performance on the last preseason match. And I really think he can get a place on the midfield and relegate Mateus Nunes to the bench. And I think that Palhinha and Vendel would be a very, very interesting pair to watch on Sporting's midfield. And also that there's the Acunha situation, which was one of the players that played the most matches on the last 3 seasons. So a very regular player that had a lot of attitude on the pitch. And I think a lot of the fans loved him for it. He was a guy that never gave a ball as lost. So he was always ready to put up a fight, to challenge for the ball. And until the referee said the match was over, he was still one of the guys still running like a crazy and trying to get the whole team with him to try to win matches. So I think that the spirit that he brought to the team was quite important. And I think that he also added a lot of quality on the left wing. But if he really gets transferred to another team, which is the most likely scenario at this point, I think you have a perfect replacement for him, which is Nuno Mendes, which we were already discussing. I would very gladly swap him for Diogo Leite. And I think Nuno Mendes will be one of the surprises this season. I'm not so sure if he still qualifies as a surprise, because he already played for 6 or 7, if I'm not mistaken, matches last season, but he showed a tremendous amount of quality. He's only 18 and he's already a starting player for our under-21 team. So I think he will be a replacement to fill in Acunha's shoes. And I don't think that after you saw Mendes play for a couple of matches, I don't think you'll miss Acunha that much. But let's see, he's only a youngster, and a lot of things can happen during the season, but I think he can be the perfect replacement for that position. So that's why I don't think that the departure of Acunha will have such an impact on the team as, for example, Mathias will.
Definitely, and a very insightful dissection of the Sporting team, that's for sure. So I won't ruin it with my bias. I'll just leave it for our listeners to take it all in, and let's take a break and then come back with our last section. So welcome back, listeners, to the final section on our preview of Liga NOS, Portugal's first division. We've now discussed top 5 and everything that is happening there. Let's keep it on also talking about Liga NOS, but now focusing on relegation. Let's talk a bit about it. There's not to the same extent as we talked about the first 5, but what do you see in terms of the relegations? If you were to choose, so this year we'll have a bit of a different relegation situation. You'll have 2 teams relegated directly going on a playoff like they do in Germany. Just in a very interesting decision by the Liga Portugal in that sense. So who are your teams to be relegated directly?
First of all, there's a comment I'd like to make on that announcement, which is finally. I mean, the Portuguese league was actually the only league that was played between 18 teams that was still relegating only 2 teams per season. And I really don't want to be rude or mean, but I think we've witnessed for the last couple of years, a lot of teams that were really just trying to get the minimum standards to stay on the league, because there were only 2 teams dropping. Because we had some seasons where at least 4 or 5 teams deserved to be relegated due to the poor quality of football. I know it's not easy for those teams with lower budgets to get competitive players and form competitive squads, but still the quality of play was really below what would be expected for a first division. So I'm very happy with the decision to actually introduce the playoff system this year. And let's start with the 2 top-bottom teams that I predict that would be the 2 top-bottom teams. One of them is Nacional. And I'll explain why. Nacional is a team that got promoted last year. And first things first, they got promoted because the league was decided to be over due to the pandemic. So they didn't play all the matches until the end of the league. And since they were second place, they got promoted. I don't think they have a bad squad. And I actually like their coach, but I don't think that squad will be enough for the first division. I mean, I was not so convinced with their promotion from the second league, so I cannot be convinced that they will stay in the first league after that. So unless they have significant changes in the squad, I really don't think that they will be able to maintain themselves in the first division. Having that said, I would move on to the other team that I also think that will be directly relegated, which is Tondela, which is a team from a small town in Portugal that was hanging on its neck on the last 4 or 5 seasons, but then in the last 4 or 5 matches, they always managed to stay up because they had a lot of players that had a lot of attitude and smart coaches that knew how to get those points on those important moments, as you mentioned about Lito Vidigal. But I really think this year that they won't make it, because you look at their squad and they just lost António Xavier, Pepe Lu, Claudio Ramos, Pité, Jonathan Toro, Ronan. So from their starting 11, I've just mentioned 6 players. Maybe Toro wasn't always on the starting 11, but at least the other 5. So they lost half of their team. And so far, to be honest, I don't know some of the players that they brought in, but I don't think that they will be as good as the ones that left. And I think these players were a key part of why they managed to stick around in the first division for so long. Then they also changed manager. They changed from Nacho Gonzalez to another Spanish manager, Paco Estaran. And I also think that it will be tough for them not having a coach that has more experience in the first league. Not specifically the Portuguese first league, but first league experiences. He coached a lot in Mexico from what I saw. So I don't think that he knows exactly what's coming for him in the Portuguese league, let's say. So, for example, a coach like Lito Vidigal is a coach that could get this team to make 6 points in the last 2 matches if they needed to. I don't think that Paco Estaran will be the right man to. Then I would also mention Santa Clara, because they lost a couple of important players, like the central defender that played for Benfica before Cesar. They lost Guilherme Scatine, their top forward, that just left for Braga. So they lost some important players, and their new manager, this is a very personal opinion, but I'm really not a big fan of their new manager. As you mentioned, Marítimo last year didn't do a very good job, and they had the same manager that will now be managing Santa Clara, which is Daniel Ramos. So they didn't play a very attractive football last season, and I think Santa Clara won't play very attractive football this season. But let's wait and see. Maybe I might be wrong. Maybe I'm not. And then I would also add Belenenses, because they also lost a lot of important players, like the winger Marco Matias, their keeper, which was Coffee, then the midfielder Show, which was on loan by Lille, which has just pulled him off Belenenses and loaned him to Boavista as part of their deal. Then Andrés Santos, Nuno Coelho, so experienced players of the first league. And I think it will be tough for them to stay in the league, having lost these important players. Just one clarification, Daniel Ramos wasn't managing Marítimo last year. He managed them, I think it was in 2017 and 2018. But their quality of play was really poor. So I think that's the image that I got from him. And then last year, Boavista was also really poor. So I reckon that he won't be able to do much more with this squad of Santa Clara.
So in short for you, to go directly down, which teams do you have?
It's Nacional and Tondela.
Very well. I will follow you also on Tondela. I think they've reached their limit currently with the team. They're already pretty lucky last season on not going down. And I think Nacional is definitely a candidate. I would also put Gil Vicente up on the board. Because Gil lost for me, their most interesting player in Ruben Ribeiro in terms of a guy who was able to do something. I think he's a guy who's able to come even if it's from the bench, who is able to deliver something, and I think they should be also on the board. But I guess you're right. Let's see once we get there. In terms of transfer market, let's do a short one in terms of who you think are your top 3 purchases.
So when I was considering what I would place as a top purchase, I think I had to take into consideration the cost of the player and what he can add to the team. So I think this will surprise many of our listeners that I won't mention some of Benfica's transfers, like Pedrinho, which costed 18 million, or Waldschmidt 15 million, or Everton's Paulinho. But because of what he can add and because of the low cost that he represents, I would put Jan Vertonghen. That would be my third place in the top 3. Because Vertonghen is a player that will add a lot of experience. And if Benfica is seeking international success, he's the guy. He played a lot of years for Tottenham in the Premier League, so he's very experienced. He knows how to react on tough environments. He knows how to regroup a team in tough matches in European context. So I think he's a very solid defensive player. He's not exactly young, but nowadays with all the care that the players have for their bodies, I think he still has a lot to offer. You can see by the example of Mathieu in Sporting and Pepe in Porto. So I think Vertonghen still has at least 3 years to give to Benfica, and he can really help them make their defense more solid. So, and considering he came on a free transfer, obviously he will be one of the highest earners in the squad, and there will be as a generous signing bonus. I think it's still a very costly, efficient transfer. Then number 2, I will have to add Angel Gomes from Boavista. I think he's a player that was wanted by half of Europe when he decided to leave Man United and not renew his contract. And due to their partnership with Lille, Boavista managed to get one of the most promising players in Europe. And for the Portuguese league, and especially for a club that is supposed to be on mid-table, I think that's a fantastic signing. Also with no cost associated. Obviously, it's just a loan, but still it will help them to get success on the pitch. Then first spot, I would say Nico Gaetan. Also considering that it's a free transfer, it's a player that already showed class in the Portuguese league, and he's coming to play for Braga. So a team that is desperate to get on the same level as the top 3. And I think he's the kind of signing that can bring them up a step and get them closer to the top 3 rather than just being the top 4. And I would say these are my top 3.
I think I will agree with you in terms of Vertonghen. I also had him maybe because of the Mathieu bias, as you've pointed out. When you see those experienced center backs coming back to the Portuguese league, I think they're able to deliver a lot. If we look into the one you pointed out in Nico Gaetan, I think he's gonna be a very interesting player for the league. And he's going to be able to deliver a lot. But I still think first place I would have to give it to Everton Cebolinha. I think currently for me, he's the second or third best player of Brazil's national team, which you might say, yeah, but it's not Ronaldinho, Ronaldo, Romario Brazil, but still it's Brazil. And the guy is off the charts. It's the player I'm most excited to be honest, to see in playing, even more than a Darwin Núñez or something like that. So I would agree with 2 of yours, but in first place I would put Everton Cebolinha definitely as a most interesting player. Now I wanted to know is for you the biggest surprise in terms of player and manager. I think in terms of player, I had something you pointed out. I would have Nuno Mendes. I don't know if we can put him down as a biggest surprise, but I think it's a clear one, right?
Yeah, I have the same on my list. I have only two names, and the top name is Nuno Mendes. As I mentioned before, I'm not really sure we can call him a surprise since he already played last year a couple of matches, but he really made you wanted to see more. If he's 18 and he's playing with such confidence, just looking like he's the most relaxed guy on the pitch, that there's no pressure on his shoulders, and he's just 18. So I think that reminded me, obviously not trying to get into comparisons, but that reminded me the cockiness of Cristiano Ronaldo playing for Sporting. He was on the pitch with 17 and he didn't care that on the other side you had John O'Shea or Wes Brown when they played against United. So he just didn't care. He was just there trying to play his football and show everyone what he's worth. And I see a lot of that in Nuno Mendes. I would also add another name, which might be a surprise because last year was a huge disappointment, which is Nakajima. As I mentioned before from Porto, I think he's the reinforcement that the club will have that actually costs no money this year since he's already on the squad. And mostly due to off-the-pitch problems. Last year he barely played and had any impact, but he's a player that promised so much while he was playing for Portimonense a couple of seasons ago. So if he can confirm that potential, playing on a higher standard for Porto, I think he could be an amazing signing, let's call it like that, this year. But we'll have to see.
And in terms of biggest surprise of a team, do you have someone in mind? For me, clearly, and I pointed this out at the start, I think it's going to be a team like Marítimo, with their strong man defense led by Lito. I think they'll be able to do a really interesting league with a very small investment, which is something that unfortunately Lito always had, a very small investment. Who do you think is going to be the surprise in terms of team?
Well, I think the biggest surprise is clearly Boavista. I just cannot tell you if it will be a good surprise or a bad one, because I think they're building a roster, a squad with a lot of interesting players. Their manager isn't very experienced in the first league, so I think it could either go very well or very, very bad. But let's see. But I think there will be a surprise either for the good side or the bad side. In terms of the good side surprises, I would also put Vitória de Guimarães. They failed their objectives last year, but they were actually playing very interesting football. Unfortunately, the coach is not the same, but they have Thiago Mendes, which is also a surprise in itself. So let's see if he can actually prove to show that he's as a good manager as he was while as a player, because he has a very interesting squad filled with young potential talents and that can be compensated by the experience of players like Ricardo Quaresma, who has just signed today. So I think they have a good balance between young, potentially fantastic players and experience in Quaresma or players like Silvio. So let's see if Thiago can also prove himself as a manager and get them to an Europa League spot.
Wow, that was a very, very insightful conversation. Thank you so much for your insights. Miguel, thank you for I think all our listeners, and not only myself, appreciate all of it. It was a very interesting conversation, and I think everyone now knows a bit more about Liga NOS and all the players. Cheers!
Thank you very much, Alex. Looking forward for this season and see what's coming.
Thanks, and remember, listeners, to follow us on Instagram on Euro Football Verdicts. Email us your questions on eurofootballverdicts@gmail.com, and adios.